There's a lot of people that never thought we were going to be the one that we're going to, like, after all those years, be one of the few only Brazilian bands to make out of Brazil that way. I mean, I think it surprised 90% of the Brazilian artists still does today. Talking the real big people still come to us sometimes and they don't understand. They go
like who?
Like Caetano Veloso and Gilberto Gil.
Oh really?
Big people, yeah.
They come to you and what do they say?
How'd you do it?
We know how it is to be in a band from a third world country, try to break it out, and they know that feeling. And for them to see a band like us break it out, it's important for Brazil.
Max and Igor Cavalera are the sibling co-founders of the Brazilian metal band Sepultura. Now, aside from Brazilian musical giants like Caetano Veloso, Gilberto Gil, Antonio Carlos Jobim, João and Astrid Gilberto, with Girl from Ipanema, and other Brazilian artists of that stature, there really isn't another band from Brazil that has reached the same level of international prominence as Sepultura. It's not as if they sold a ton of records and became stadium superstars, but for where their origins started and how humble their beginnings were, compared to the fact that they are forever in the pantheon of metal, and they attracted attention from people like Dave Grohl and Bjork.
Sepultura, I think, are one of the most amazing bands.
I really love their energy. Seems very sort of honest energy.
They are truly up there with some of the most celebrated artists that their native country has ever seen or produced. I'm Saby Reyes-Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist. Welcome to Feedback Def. Thanks for hanging with me. All right, please do hit that like and subscribe button. Please do engage in the comments. Speaking of humble beginnings, Sepultura's first EP and album, Bestial Devastation and Morbid Visions, are some of the most amateurish sounding recordings, in metal. They were kids. They were in their teens. The production is endearingly horrible. Right? And I say endearing because it's it's got a charm to it. At the time that they were making these records, there was really no metal infrastructure in Brazil. The studios that they went to weren't familiar with the type of music they were playing. I mean, even you could say the same thing applied in the States and Europe to a lesser degree, right? This was still underground stuff. These guys were very much into black, death, and thrash metal in the most underground sense. They were really into bands like Hellhammer, which is the precursor to Celtic Frost, Creator, Bathory, things like that. The more underground, the more raw, the more they were into it. And so the sound on Morbid Visions and Bestial Devastation reflects this naivete, not only on their part, and this real rough, underdeveloped approach, but also on the part of the people recording the music too. So the Cavalera brothers decided in 2023 to re-record Morbid Visions and Bestial Devastation. They then in 2024 re-recorded Sepultura's second album, Schizophrenia. Okay, so the Cavalera brothers found Sepultura. Max is the older brother. He is the rhythm guitar player and vocalist. Iggor is the drummer. And over the course of 10 years or so, a little bit more than 10 years, they rise in prominence from this real underground act that, you're reading about in the backs of metal magazines, pardon my cold, to an act that is, playing festivals and is more and more coming to the forefront in terms of exposure, both in the States and in Europe. By the time you get to 1996, they go platinum in the US with their album Roots. Initially, they are super into, the bands I mentioned, like European and American underground metal acts. So they're super into like Hellhammer, Creator, and they want to sound like those bands. They don't want to allow for any Latin influences in their music. Max Cavalera, by the way, hates samba music, but his brother would go to the soccer games and play in the like the audience, like members, that would do this like percussion troupe ensemble thing in the crowd. And slowly but steadily, actually, you can hear it from the very beginning. You can hear it from these first two primitive recordings of theirs. There is an undercurrent of Latin rhythmic sensibility. It steadily increases so that by the time you get to their fifth album, Chaos AD, they decide to embrace this aspect of their origins. And so Chaos AD and Roots are very, very, very overtly Latin influenced in terms of rhythms, especially Roots, which is like this. That's never been one of my favorite albums by them for whatever that's worth, but as far as the different elements that it pulls in, it's incredible. The mishmash of different things. So on Roots, not only do they dive headfirst into Latin rhythms, Brazilian rhythms specifically, under the guidance of Carlinhos Brown, but they also start to explore this totally unfamiliar to them world of indigenous sounds. It's a very, very involved story, but they end up recruiting, I guess, or reaching out to this tribe that lives in a remote rural part of Brazil named the Javanti. I have interviewed Iggor Cavalera about this, I think twice, actually. The story is fascinating. I've written about this at length, and it's covered in Max Cavalera's autobiography. It's covered in the Sepultura biography, Relentless. There's lots of sources for this. I wrote a 10,000 word piece for Pop Matters in 2016 about this, and I also wrote about it for Nashville Scene when Max and Igor were doing the album in its entirety together. So this is the highest selling album in the entire Sepultura catalog. They're touring Europe. They're being covered by MTV multiple times on that run. And they're about to play the States. And at the final show of their European tour in close to Christmas of '96, the band confronts Max, including Igor, about switching. They want to change their manager, who happens to be Max's wife, Gloria Cavalera, who was also instrumental in the rise of the bands Flotsam and Jetsam and Sacred Reich, who are based in Arizona, like she's from Arizona. So in early 1997, it is announced that Max abruptly leaves the band. There's a lot of back and forth in the press. He and his brother, who stays on in Sepultura for almost a decade, do not speak that entire time. By 2006, things between Igor and Sepultura are starting to fray. He ends up sitting out of a tour. Then 6 months later, he leaves. Then he calls his brother. They start the Cavalera conspiracy, which is the precursor or the foundation of what they're doing now with these remake albums. So I reviewed the first Cavalera conspiracy album, their original material, and didn't like it. It's like in 2008 or something. I interviewed Max for that, and I gave it a bad review, and Gloria compared me to the guy who shot John Lennon for giving it a bad review. I thought that was a little extreme. Now I want to read this review. I dug it up. So this is for Phoenix New Times. So this is their hometown, Gloria and Max Cavalera's hometown alternative news weekly. It goes without saying that Sepultura's indelible impact on metal hinged on the chemistry between the band's sibling co-founders Max and Igor Cavalera. But despite the buzz surrounding their reunion inflicted, the pair's first collaboration in more than 10 years sounds more like the product of a weekend spent jamming in the garage than the efforts of two vital artists making up for lost time. Restored blood ties and nostalgia aside, it's obvious in retrospect that the nu metal direction Max began to pursue on Sepultura's bestseller Roots was at odds with the more refined experimental sensibilities of his estranged brother and Sep guitarist Andreas Kisser. But for all the rhythmic finesse he's clearly capable of, Iggor, arguably Sepultura's secret weapon, pretty much phones in his performance here. Perhaps that's because Max dominates the record so much that he nullifies the uniqueness of his brother's presence. Oh, that's a clunky sentence right there. After almost 25 years, Max apparently has yet to learn how to hang back in the music. And as he approaches middle age, this is 15 years ago now, 17 years ago now, he's in dire need of fresh creative energy. With Inflicted, he misses a golden opportunity, and one has to wager that an Iggor solo album with Max supporting would have been more adventurous. At least Soulfly's brutish riffing gets you moving. Except for a handful of invigorating moments, this album barely even does that. So one thing I should say here is I interviewed Max for Phoenix New Times, knowing that I was going to give the album a bad review, and I felt bad about that. So somehow either I asked for Gloria to reach out to me, or I gave the publicist my phone number or something. So she might have found my number and just called me, or I called her. Somehow we got on the phone and we had a conversation after this because she was not happy with my review. And I hinted towards the end of my interview with Max that I wasn't a fan of the record and I wanted to be upfront about that. But I did feel bad because I felt like I didn't want them to feel like it was an ambush, and it felt dishonest to me. Like, hey, let's have this conversation and I'm about to pan your record. And I almost never pan albums in reviews. It's very, very rare that I've done that. And if I'm just doing a feature story, I don't have to like your music. We're going to talk about your process and I'll write about that. My opinion of what you're doing has very little bearing on that. But I felt like I didn't feel good about, hey, let's lead with, hey, I want to do an interview. And meanwhile, I'm knowing I hate this record. So I think I made an overture to them to be like, hey, I just want to explain where I'm coming from about this. And I understand how you feel. This is your hometown weekly. But at the same time, it was like, how dare you criticize this album kind of. And it wasn't quite like that. We did end the conversation on a positive note. I said to her, hey, I'm happy to talk to Max. I'm coming from the perspective of a fan. She said, I know that. So there was an understanding at the end there. But it's interesting to point out here, one thing that's really, really fascinating about this whole story and Ball of Wax. When Max and Igor reconciled, they never talked about it. They never had a conversation about 10 years worth of issues. And it's actually more than that, because I interviewed Igor backstage with a little handheld recorder before I was even a working music journalist. And this was backstage at the last show of their dates in 2001 after the album Nation was out. And I will never release this interview because he was so pointed. Not so much towards Gloria. He was diplomatic, although he did express that there were issues with how the band felt they were being managed and the emphasis on Max. But towards Max, wow. It was really, really, really pointed and personal. And he explicitly said, no, put this out there. I want you to put this out there. Because I said, are you sure? Because no, I want you to. I wouldn't do that now, even though it's very spicy and the fans would love it. And even though it would be illuminating to see what the change of heart has been over time, I just think it would be putting salt on a wound. I mean, I find it interesting, but there was real acrimony here, particularly between these two guys who are siblings, who are blood relatives. And the fact that they never even sat down and hashed it out, to me, I find like amazing. There's this interview, I'll try to find the YouTube clip and post a link, where Max says, it was a situation where neither one of us was completely innocent and neither one of us was completely guilty, which I think is a really healthy way to look at it. So instead of talking about it, they made Inflicted with Joe Duplantier from Gojira. They just gave him a bass instead of a guitar. And Mark Rizzo, longtime, at the time, Soulfly guitar player. And they did that. Now, I should also say, by their third album, I dig it. I dig what they started to do. by that point. I thought the first album was really lazy and just kind of like caveman music, not what I would want if these two guys are pushing themselves. But in retrospect, hey, listen, let them bang out a record just as a proxy for talking over a decade's worth of being estranged. And one really cool wrinkle that gave me a lot of insight into Max and Igor's relationship. I interviewed Max a different time. This was after Cavalera conspiracy, or maybe a little bit before, I can't remember. I know they had already made up. They had mended the fence. So he said in a not disparaging way, he was just talking about how one of the dynamics of their relationship was, Igor was always like, oh, I don't do this, I don't do that. He was very straight edge, and Max was painting a picture of someone who's very picky and kind of peevish, but it wasn't meant to be disparaging. It was kind of like, oh, this was the dynamic when we would be working together, on Chaos AD and stuff, and I would want to do one thing, and Igor wouldn't budge in the opposite direction, so they would end up not doing what he wanted. It actually might have even been that same interview, now that I think about it, because Max was talking about, there was a song on there that was like a cross between, I forgot who it was, Morbid Angel and Agnostic Front, or Morbid Angel and the Cro-Mags. That's how Max pictured it. And he loved the ending, and Igor wanted to cut it short. And he was like, oh, what the fuck, Igor? Like, come on, man. Like, I want to keep that going. And Igor was like, no. Let's just make it short and sweet. Leave people hungry. That kind of thing. So he was saying that in a celebratory way, but it really was this like one crack of shedding light on what their relationship must be like in all its dimensions. And you just got to wonder about all the things, or I did, on hearing that, all the interactions we've never been privy to, we've never seen, we have no way of, we couldn't be flies on the wall for that. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent, or otherwise. How their whole way of being with one another must have been. Because you're talking about two people who have been inseparable since they were pre-teens and basically done everything together except for this one really dramatic decade-long rift. It's pretty amazing. I still hate that record, though. For whatever that's worth. So, Gloria, she said there are two people in the world who don't like this album, you and Andreas Kisser. Andreas Kisser is Sepultura's lead guitar player, who joined in 1987 in time to make their second album, Schizophrenia. So just a little bit about where I'm coming from. Sepultura is one of my favorite bands. Andreas Kisser is my favorite guitar player of all time. However, Iggor Cavalera is also one of my favorite drummers ever. So I am biased. But perhaps the best endorsement of Andreas' contribution to Schizophrenia and to the band as a whole came from none other than Max himself. In a 2017 piece for Revolver magazine, that wasn't even that long ago, Max had this to say: "We were listening to Morbid Angel, Death, Bathory, and Celtic Frost. Andreas was more into Metallica and Ozzy. It made for a good mix, and we wrote some really cool shit. The songs got more elaborate, and we just got better. He brought really cool thrash elements to the band that weren't there before, and the music became more complicated. If you listen to Inquisition Symphony, that song's got 500 riffs. Everything just got better." We met Andreas in Sao Paulo. He was playing in a band called Pestilence, and they were a thrash band. I saw him play, and he totally kicked ass. He played great leads, and he could do all this Randy Rhoads stuff. On the music side, Andreas joining is what Max is talking about. It was huge because he could really play. So, that sounds very different in tone to what the Cavaleras have been saying now. They haven't explicitly come out and said that Andreas' contribution was unimportant. They haven't, flagrantly minimized it, but still. I do think the Cavalera brothers have a spark between them. Now, one thing to understand here, which is important for context for these remakes and where these artists are now. Max Cavalera has always favored rougher, rawer, more guttural expressions, right? His rhythm guitar style is very, very, very more like a hardcore player. He'd play with the top two strings on the guitar. Andreas Kisser is on the opposite side of the spectrum. He is a very, very, very refined, extremely technically proficient, I would say. Extremely, I guess compared to maybe Yngwie Malmsteen and people like that, maybe not. But in my view, He is the ultimate combination of technical proficiency, technical skill, and tastefulness. Like every note counts with this guy. He can do Latin, he can do classical guitar, he can, his solos are very, very, very inventive, I think, and say so much. Now, in the golden years of Sepultura, in their classic period, these two met right in the middle, and you have these incredible kind of like trains of riffs, just this like meshwork of riffs that gets more and more and more and more sophisticated until Roots, where it sort of takes a step backwards into being more, again, pummeling, more nu metal influenced. I guess you could say the same with Chaos AD because it's groove metal influenced. Anyway, these guys have been out of the band for now 20 years, and Andreas Kisser kept going with Sepultura, and Sepultura is kind of limping to the finish line. I think they're breaking up at the end of this year, 2025.
Those farewell dates are actually scheduled to run through mid-2026, and plans have also been announced for 4 new songs.
They're touring a record that's 5 years old, and it's just this like odd, kind of sad way to go out. When the Cavalera brothers redid the first album and EP, there's this sort of like youthful energy to it, and we want to get back in that sort of mindset where we were really into black metal and death metal, and it's fun. It's a revisiting of that spirit. But the remake of Schizophrenia, that album is much more sophisticated. That's the first album, again, that Andreas plays on, but they got more, they like leveled up for that record. You can hear the difference. Yes, the production, there's a kind of a roughness to it that is also appealing, but it's not like so bad it's good. It's like, oh, this is a band that's like now starting to hit its stride, and you get a lot of the thrash sophistication that would define the rest of their career. And so to redo that record, yes, it's like fun and crunchier, and it's like these guys revisiting memory lane kind of in their garage. And they execute it very precisely, right? But it's almost like they're trying to say that the other guys in the band were like incidental window dressing, which just isn't the case at all.
And yes, I know Paolo didn't actually play bass on all the classic albums.
I don't understand why you would do this. They've explained. They said the production was not up to par. There were again, even at this point in 1987, they hadn't come across a studio that could really handle what they were trying to do. But I don't think that record suffers at all from the limits of its production. I think the strength of the material and the performances shine through perfectly. And redoing it this way, like I said, it's surprisingly faithful to the original, but it's crunchier. It's a little more dark sounding. And it's like giving it more of like a black metal kind of sheen. But I'm kind of like, well, what is the point? And I feel like if they were to redo the next Sepultura album, Beneath the Remains, it would be kind of sacrilegious, because that, by the time you get to that album, okay, they're really, really like a serious like musical machine by that point, and you couldn't really take this approach to that material. It's not like just bang it out kind of stuff. It's very rigorous and demanding. And yes, they have performed that stuff live on their own, but I would not want to see them remake that record. And Travis Stone from Pig Destroyer, he does the leads on this record. Max's son Iggor plays bass, and it's like, I don't know. Again, like I just don't see the value in just taking another lead guitar player and doing something that you had this like amazing musician who joined your band and really helped you step it up, right? Like was a huge part of, literally instrumental in why this band got to the point where it could be taken seriously, right? And to just sprinkle, drop, plug and play another person in there, I don't see the point of that. Is it fun? Sure. Does it have its charms? Sure. If you love these original songs like I do, can you listen to it and go, that's pretty cool, almost like a cover band doing it? Like if I heard a band play this and I was in a venue and I was like not really paying attention and I heard them play, I'd go, oh, wow, cool, right? I would enjoy it in that context. But to listen to this over the original, I'm just not inclined to do that. On the other hand, these guys, like I said, definitely have a musical bond that shows. They have a spirit about what they do. I think Max Cavalera, when he's very much about sort of imposing limits on himself, but there are times, like in his other group, Go Ahead and Die, with his son, that it can be very, very, very compelling. When he's not just sort of wallowing in just, let's just bang it out and play it rough. When there's a little bit of like pushing, that's, I think, when he's at his most ideal. And some of that shows here. It's like they do care enough about their legacy. This is not carelessly done at all, right? And I think that's to be commended. But, again, I don't know why you want to rewrite the past. And I'm not a big fan of these remake records across the board. I don't think you are the same person. People think that they wrote something or created something and that they have the sort of license because it's a part of them and they gave birth to it to go back and retool things later. I don't like it when directors do that because I don't think you're ever that same person. And so to go back and then rechannel something that was already made just never feels quite in alignment for me. I should also say that Iggor Cavalera, one of the things that I love so much about his playing is that there's a real undeniable feel to the way he plays. There always has been. And that does come across here, even though these guys are like trying to get back in the mindset of like the more rough-edged early stuff they were doing that wasn't quite as ambitious. Although I would say Schizophrenia is ambitious for its time, but they're trying to like dial back the clock to like a more youthful frame of mind. But I mean, I would also recommend you check out his stuff in the electronic realm. Like he's played with Soulwax, and he's got a split album with Shane Embry from Napalm Death. So, I mean, this is somebody who has really, for quite some time now, expanded beyond metal. And so I think this for him is just fun to play with his brother. But in other realms, he's more into just breaking new ground. And that's the thing with this band. They were huge on breaking ground, especially in their classic period. And I would say even beyond that too. Now, I would also say that in reverse, although I am a fan of when they changed singers, when Derek Green replaced Max Cavalera. I don't think... I think the same is true. You can't just like drop somebody else in and recover the same spirit. And as Sepultura's history has gone on and more people have come in and out of the band, I think there is I would have preferred that they changed their name at a certain point. And I feel like there's a sense that they're like I said, limping to the finish line. So I thought the split worked well in Sepultura's favor at first. I thought when Iggor left the band, that was a different story. And I feel like they did that one album named A-lex in 2008, I think it was, without Iggor, that first album without Iggor. And I think they should have changed the name from that point onwards.
And that's not through any fault of these drummers. I actually think very highly of the drummers Gian Dolabella and Eloy Casagrande and the records they did with the band. I really, really, really like those records. And I think both of those drummers, Gian and Eloy, both being Brazilian, very technically proficient, much more so than Iggor, and they both have incredible feel. Eloy was literally a child prodigy. He's like one of these people that you'd see as a kid, like just totally tearing it up on TikTok or something, right? He was that before TikTok. And he has incredible feel. He's really, really inventive. But seeing those two guys do Igor's parts live, something is lacking for me. And it just goes to show there doesn't have to be anything quote unquote wrong with the player or deficient in that player's style for that player's adaptation of another player, particularly somebody who has as much character in his playing as Iggor, for it just not to gel. And that's another issue I have with the live incarnations of Sepultura post Iggor. I think very highly of those records. I love A-lex. I think it has a new, like, very fresh charge of energy, just like Against did after Max left. I'm just, when I've gone to see the post-Iggor band live, I just feel like, what am I watching here? It just doesn't feel right. Now, if Iggor had stuck to his guns, totally planted his flag and said, no, this is the career decision I've made. I'm sticking to it. Maybe if he had even reconciled with Max and done some stuff with Max on the side, but said, no, I'm in this band. I'm sticking this out to the end. I think that would have been cool, but that's not the way it turned out. And what's interesting is he actually gave them his blessing, or at least said so in the press, to keep using the name after he quit. But he did express that he felt disrespected, was the term he used, by them scheduling the touring after Dante 21, which was an album he had a huge hand in shaping. This is back in 2006. He said, it bothered him that they decided to schedule a tour even though he was asking for time off. So I don't know what happened there, but it is very, very clear that both of the brothers' relationship with Andreas is pretty much shot at this point. It seems really, really clear coming from their camp that they want nothing to do with Andreas and Paulo. That's a shame that there's so much hovering over this really amazing body of work, this really amazing, beautiful history.
So it's unfortunate, I guess, where things stand now. I would prefer not to see a reunion of the classic lineup. I would prefer that Sepultura make another album and then call it a day. And I would also prefer that the Cavalera brothers stop here without, doing more of these remakes. I don't think they're necessary. However enjoyable they might be, I think it's like, all right, let's kind of hold back on reclaiming history. History is what it is, regardless of, you can't go back and rewrite it. You know what I mean? Regardless of how you feel about the people you made those records with, they were there. Some years ago, Gloria Cavalera posted on her blog, which I actually find quite entertaining, and I'm glad it's still up online. It stopped in 2019. She stopped posting. But she was posting for years, for a stretch there. And at one point, I'll put the link in the show notes. She posted Max's demo recording that he did on his own for the song Roots Bloody Roots. And her description was something along the lines of, now we get to see, how Max was the creative force behind this band, and you can hear it right here that he's the one that brought everything. And it's like, no, you can't. Actually, it's the opposite. And this is clearly someone who doesn't understand what band chemistry is. Like it's right in front of her. She was managing them for years and didn't see that a band, the magic in a band, is the interaction between the various players, the chemistry. There's something you can't quite put your finger on. It's intangible, but it's there. It's undeniable. And for her to post that, which sounds completely like it's very wooden, it's very one-dimensional. And for her not to recognize what his brother and Andreas brought to that song, to make it swing the way that they did, is frankly sad and just almost offensive to me as a fan of the band. I mean, I understand from a manager's perspective, someone who's in the music industry. At the time that Gloria Cavalera connected with Sepultura, she was already, I guess you could say, an industry veteran. And someone working in that capacity is going to tend to think of artists in terms of who's a star and who's not a star. At least that's what I've encountered. And so Max Cavalera clearly has star power. That's undeniable. But
I can completely see it from the band's point of view. There's this quote from Andreas where, I forgot what magazine it was. It might have been Kerrang or Metal Hammer or something. It was actually a physical magazine in the 90s when Zion, their son, was born. So they have a son named Zion, they have a son named Iggor, and Richie. Anyway, when Zion was born, Andreas took umbrage to the fact, and I believe Iggor, Max's brother, not his son, little Iggor wasn't born yet, or they called him Iggy at the time. The magazine put Max and Gloria and the baby on the cover. And Andreas has this quote where he goes, creating children is nothing special. I have 3 of them, which I think is kind of a dick thing to say, but I completely understand his point, which is like, wait, why are you putting this family on the cover and placing undue emphasis on Max? And the way Gloria posted the Roots demo and what she says about it on her blog completely backs that up. And so from her point of view, it's like, well, you guys wouldn't have gotten as far as you did without me. And from their point of view, it's like, well, you're involved, you're married to our front man, and front people get undue credit anyway. And that's not to say, I want to be careful because I don't think that Max's riffs were lacking at all in their golden years. I think the marriage of his riffing style with Andreas's, it was the perfect marriage until it wasn't. Once he started to go in a more simplistic direction, so you see some of that on Chaos AD, which I think holds up very well. But once he starts to get into the new metal style, really, really, really stripped down approach to riffing, right? I mean, I think it's compelling on that record too. I think that riff for Roots Bloody Roots, the one she posted the demo for, I think that riff is hypnotic. I think it's amazing, but it's like he was going in a more simplistic Neanderthal kind of direction on purpose, and Andreas and Iggor were going in the opposite direction. And I feel like their split happened from a musical perspective at the right time, especially judging from the results of each party after that. Against is the first album they did without Max, is one of my favorite albums in their whole catalog. And man, the rhythmic complexity of that record and how far they delve into the finer points of those rhythms compared to what Max did right after with Soulfly, which is just, a caveman holding like a billy club, No, I mean, maybe that's a little unfair, but Andreas and Iggor both multiple times said, look, Max went, he got the same studio, the same producer, and all he did was replace the guitar player, the lead guitar player, the drummer, and the bass player, and basically made the same, not the same record, but took the exact same approach as Roots. So to me, the split in retrospect was almost inevitable. And the other thing is the emotional tone and the lyrical thrust of what Max started doing after he left with Soulfly and what the other guys did. You can hear it on Roots. I mean, the anger in Max's lyrics just spill over to me into self-pity and whininess and just this like bucket full of bile with no reason for the listener to get behind it. There's no substance to it other than I'm angry and I'm demanding that if you're real and you really get me, that you'll be angry too. And it's like, nah, I need a little more than that. And you can completely tell with the tone the lyrics took right after he left. Everything on the other side of it has been more reflective, has been more observational. There's thought. They're talking about actual topics, maybe not always super, not necessarily that articulate, but at least it's looking at things going on around them instead of I'm angry, my stepson died, and you need to be on board with my grief. It's well, do we? I mean, yes, that's obviously a horrendous thing for a mother, because that wasn't his actual son, Dana Wells, who died in 1996. But Obviously, a parent losing a child is the worst imaginable thing. I understand the grief, but if you're going to, I guess, like, use that as like an on-ramp to 20 to 30 years worth of rage in your music, I'm not, that doesn't grab me. That doesn't do anything for me. Show us what grief feels like, rather than just throw a pity party over several, a bunch of different records. Now, his spirit is a lot different. I wouldn't say a lot different. It's more upbeat and into the celebration of metal for its own sake. Now, he's become, Max, more like a fun grandfather type figure who wears, bullet armbands or spiked armbands and bullet belts and stuff. And that's much more inviting. That's why I think some of the material on Go Ahead and Die is much more compelling. But that's because his son is a much more thoughtful lyricist and is looking out at the world and expressing his feelings on it. It's not like, I'm Max, I'm angry, I'm self-pitying because people don't get me. Like, be mad with me. Metal. That's not what metal means to me. I'm not listening to metal to feel sorry for you or myself. Certainly not you, right? Because the world doesn't get me. Like, we heard that on Inner Self, and that was cool. That's 1989, okay? You're a grandfather at this point. Come on. Do more. And that's my point with all of these things that I'm saying. I expect more from people who've done so much. I feel like Max Cavalera has rested on his laurels basically since 1996. And, what better a way to rest on your laurels than go back and do the first EP your band ever did, the first album they ever did, and the second album? Like, what are we doing here? By doing these remake records, the Cavalera brothers it's like they're acting like they have a claim to all of that history. Now, they certainly have a claim to it, but they don't have a sole claim to it. They don't have the claim to it. And that's just absurd. Regardless of whatever, I don't know the behind the scenes of the decisions Andreas made, but the idea that the Cavaleras can just reclaim the back catalog as their own is just absolutely absurd. There's no way these guys become anything more than a speck of dust, even in Brazil. Like, completely forgotten about, completely obscure, completely like just awash with hardly anybody knowing who the fuck they even were if it weren't for Andreas. Which is not, again, to downplay their contributions either, but it was the chemistry between them, all three of them, because, Paulo didn't play on all the records. According to Max's autobiography, Paulo didn't play on anything prior to Chaos AD. And then Max says that Andreas and him played the bass parts on all the records up to that point. According to Paulo, he did an interview in 2021, I believe, 2020, prior to the release of the album Quadra, which is their latest studio album to date. And according to their plans, appears like it's going to be their last. Paulo says he didn't play on Schizophrenia and Beneath the Remains. But here's the thing. Max says in the book, and somebody can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong here, that Paulo actually did play the bass solo that's right before the song Mass Hypnosis. Paulo didn't mention that himself, but if that's true, that solo, has an almost Jaco Pastorius-like feel and vibe to it. It really does underscore what I remember from Max's book, that it wasn't that he didn't have the skill, it was that he would get the jitters when the record light was on, and he just got the studio equivalent of stage fright. I don't know what you could say he brought to the musical chemistry. It's certainly on Chaos AD and Roots, he does play on everything from Chaos AD onwards. I do think he brings something to all those records. Of course, Max has downplayed his contribution, and now Iggor has done the same as well with all of the subsequent drummers who have stepped in to take his place in succession, which, though understandable, is unfair from a musical perspective and does come across as petty. But by the same token,
even saying the things that Andreas has said, like every single time they've changed drummers, insisting since 2006, oh, this is a fantastic lineup, the shows have been going fantastic. Like, it gets to sound hollow after a while. Now, each additional drummer, as I've mentioned, Gian, Eloy, and now Grayson Krutman, who joined for the farewell dates, each of them has infused new energy into the band, but when you go see them perform and they do the classic material, I feel like there's an emptiness there. I mean, I don't know the behind the scenes of the decisions Andreas made. I mean, you know, he seems over the years to have kind of hardened. Like there's a real, I'm sticking this out, come hell or high water regardless, and fuck it kind of vibe. There's a real, what's the word? He's been really resolute, but that's not the word I'm thinking of. It's a more just kind of like an obstinance, right? An inflexibility in even considering that, you know, maybe it's time to put this to rest. Until recently his wife passed away, and now it's like he's euthanizing the band, pre-planning its death, which also feels weird. I think that Derek Green doing the Max material live, for me, doesn't connect. I also think that both the Cavalera brothers and Sepultura just play the shit out of certain songs so much that, like, the classic tunes like Territory and Slave New World, I don't want to hear either party just stomp the life out of those songs anymore. Like, and I'll be blunt, seeing either one of these incarnations do that material, I feel nothing. I feel like just completely flat. Like it's just rote. Like, oh my God, like how many times Slave New World on the record, I still feel something for, but I don't want to see these guys touch those tunes again. It's more interesting when they get into stuff that they haven't played before, and the Cavalera brothers have done more of that because they've done more of these complete album gigs. Whereas Sepultura, I mean, the songs from the classic period that are in the set list are like totally predictable. And as much as, like I said, I really think highly of much of the post-Iggor catalog, it does feel one-sided to me. It feels like there isn't enough in the band to counteract Andreas's creativity. Of course, Derek is involved, and each of these drummers, Gian and Eloy, because they're the only ones we've heard on recording so far, have put their stamp on these records. But the drummers have both been in situations, and Grayson as well, where they're walking into this legacy act, and there has to be a feeling that it's like, well, I'm just the latest person to come along into this much bigger thing. And so there's a weight hanging on these records because they have the name Sepultura on them. I don't think it would be the case if they just called it something else. They could even they could have named the band after one of their lyrics, kind of like Godflesh turned into Jesu. Now, of course, throughout the world, the name Sepultura is going to be a larger live draw than whatever else they could have named the band instead. But you can see how, especially in the States where their draw is no longer great, they're basically a club band now at best. I mean, they don't even draw that well in clubs. That's not the case everywhere in the world. There are still places where they are a big, big, big draw and where they're still a big, big name. I can't speak to Brazil currently. I know they were still very, very big in the few years after Max left down there. But you've got this name with this legend around it, and you're seeing them in a club that's not super full with what has become a revolving door of drummers. And then they put out that album of tunes they did with people remotely in their Zoom sessions during the pandemic. And now they're going to do 40 songs live from 40 different cities, which is not what we want.
It's not what I want from them. And 4 new songs with Grayson, which I hopefully, fingers crossed, that turns into a whole record. But it's like, come on, man, we already got this kind of stew of tunes from your whole discography, including a lot of the classics, which I've mentioned, just sound tired. We don't need you to go out on this note as if this is this triumphant, final globe-trotting send-off and the glorious, conclusion to the lifespan of the band. That's not what this feels like to me at all. So I first saw Sepultura live in 1991 when they were headlining New Titans on the Block with Napalm Death, Sacred Reich, Biohazard. Sick of It All wasn't there at the show that I played. There were 7 bands total, and I found them to be very the main thing was they just played too fast. They didn't have any. No, it wasn't just too fast. It was like kind of sloppy. They just kind of like slurred through all the material. Luckily, the show that's captured on the 1991 Barcelona Under Siege long-form video, I think, is them in top form. I think somehow everything clicked at that show, and you get to hear all the precision, but there's a rawness also. Because, that they were playing like their brand of technical death metal at that point, death thrash, but very technical on Arise. And it just clicks on that video. That's not what I saw live. I was underwhelmed. I saw them again in 94 outdoors with Pantera and Biohazard. And again, the tempos were just like out of control. It took me like halfway through Territory to realize they had already played the part in the song where the riff inverts, where it goes. I was like, oh, they already just blazed through that. It didn't have any accent to it whatsoever. So then I saw them again I saw them 3 times in 2001, and then again in 03. I think it was once. And then I saw them in 06, and I saw them again after Kairos. And then I said, that's enough from that point on. And I actually didn't go to a few shows they played near me. Although I would have gone recently when they played with Creator, but I didn't get to go. So one thing I would say about their live show after Max left is that the tempo got better. They reined it in, and they got more careful with representing the songs and capturing the vibe of the songs tempo-wise. But there's something missing with just one guitar on the old material. It sounds like you can hear how empty it sounds. Now, if we're being fair, Max's live, I don't even know what to call it. He has not focused on guitar in quite a while. I'm not sure what the case is with the Cavalera shows. If he's buckled down and actually concentrated on playing. But I saw Soulfly whenever they toured with Morbid Angel. That must have been around 04, and I found it completely stale back then. I was like, wow, this is just so going through the motions. He does have this bluster about him that carries him a long way, right? Just the fact that he's willing to growl and scream and act angry on stage and just soak up the attention does make for, there's something to keep your eye on the stage. But in terms of the music, and then all the turnover in Soulfly and Cavalera Conspiracy, it just feels like there's a kind of autopilot going on there too. And both of these acts live, to me, are missing something. And so you can't blame Eloy for jumping ship to go join Slipknot. You just can't. At least from a strictly career standpoint, it's like, okay, we've announced that the band we're basically pulling the plug. So what am I supposed to do? Just like
plan out the next year and a half of my life and not take this golden opportunity. Now, from his perspective, I think he's got to be very careful because Slipknot is clearly a band with a very defined hierarchy, and there's a language barrier, and you're coming in, all these decades into this band's life. I cannot see that he'll have as much creative autonomy in that situation as he did with Andreas and Derek and Paolo. So you got to be careful. But I mean, on paper, it makes total sense. It's like, look, I have to take this opportunity. And you're saying we're breaking up. And just adding a drummer for your farewell dates. It's just like, man, like are the wheels falling off here or what? I mean, it just looks bad. As much as I like what Grayson brings to the table, and as much as I hope they record with him, as much as they say they've been re-energized by his presence. I mean, they've said that every time, right? With Gian and Eloy as well. And with replacement drummers too, with drummers that have just done certain live gigs with them. It just has a look of things not going well. And on the Cavalera side, they look a little more on the surface like, oh, they're holding together. But I mean, they're cycling through people with Cavalera as well. Like, Max Cavalera changes band members like he changes socks. Probably more often band members than socks. So this is not a good look for anybody involved. On the other hand, we have gotten two different streams of material where coming from the same source, where one band split up into these two separate rivers. And, I can't imagine for anybody who likes the Max era Sepultura or anything from that period, that you wouldn't like something from what each camp has had to offer since. I mean, even me, right? I clearly lean one way. But there's quite a bit of Soulfly stuff that I find irresistible in the grooves and the energy. Would I want Max to be more ambitious? Sure. Would I want Sepultura's records to be less kind of samey and sort of monotonous, in spite of the fact that my mind is like, wow, I really like these riffs and they're playing a really engaging brand of modern metal? Sure. Would I want Max's lyrics to be sort of less focused on immediate sort of id kind of, pablum puking rage? Sure. Would I want Sepultura to be less into the concept record thing? Of course. But on balance, we got this really magical, magnificent thing that broke apart into these different shards. And there are things, I'd say quite a lot, to enjoy about each, regardless of what your preference is. And I want to be clear, I said earlier that I would not want to see them reunite. Now, in late 2024, Andreas said he wanted to have all the former members of the band play at what is scheduled to be Sepultura's final show in Brazil in 2026. So that's still a ways off. It is late March of 2025 as I'm recording this. The brothers were like, yeah, that could be cool, but really, if it doesn't happen, we're fine with it because the real reunion was between me and my brother, but it could be cool, that kind of thing. Andreas has said that overtures have been made between managers and this is in talks. I absolutely would want to see the brothers and every former member of the band be at the show, but particularly the brothers. I wouldn't want them to reunite for the wrong reasons and do a tour. Like Iggor told me back in 2001 that there were offers. Sharon Osbourne had offered them money to get back together, and he's like, look, this is not about the money. That's what he told me. I would imagine there would be deep pockets lining up to have these guys do a world tour, the classic lineup. I wouldn't want to see them do that for the wrong reasons where it's hollow. But I would certainly want them to put this to rest for their own sake. I mean, it's like these guys have become gallstones in each other's souls.
for the last 20 years, all they've done is talk about each other, and they have to constantly reference this past body of work that they accomplished together and mention each other and think about one another. That's got to be difficult. And I have to think that if Max and Igor show up and they close the show with like a mini set of songs with Andreas and Paolo, and they cap it off with Roots, and they play stuff going back to like Necromancer and, all the stuff we would want to see them do, that there would be some release for all of them, for all four of them. And here's how I know this, because I interviewed Max in 06 or 08, something like that, somewhere along the time that I talked to him for the Cavalera Conspiracy. I talked to him about Soulfly. I think this was 06, so this is before Cavalera Conspiracy. And I'll post it at some point, I swear. Now, this was a couple years before he was actively campaigning for the reunion. If you remember, around 2010 or so, 2009-ish, he was really pushing for it in the press. Now he's in a different place. But he said to me, I'm paraphrasing, but this is close. He said, I have a lot of love for Andreas and Paolo too. And he told me about an incident in a hotel room. I forgot, it was in Russia somewhere, I think, where he and Andreas got into a fight and they trashed the hotel room. And he was citing this as an example of how deep the relationship went, that they had become like brothers essentially at that point. And at least back then, again, that's getting on 20 years ago, there was still love there, and he was expressing that. I can understand the band's criticism of Gloria, their manager, being married to a band member, and how Max kept his kids so close. The kids traveled. You see lots of pictures of them with like noise canceling ear protection, those headphones, sitting, on the side of the stage, Zion and Iggor, Amadeus. I can understand that. But at the same time, for better or worse, for whatever mistakes they've made, you can see Max and Gloria are family people. You can argue that that domestic bubble has made Max maybe too lackadaisical, too settled to really push himself as an artist. But at the same time, you can't argue with the fact that he is content. Whereas Andreas has the look of like a military general who's like, we're going to keep plowing forward. And if we fall off the end of the earth, then we fall off the end of the earth, but we're going to continue. But even the guy who was willing to fall off the end of the earth to stick to his mission and stick by his guns, who dug his heels in, he's offering you an olive branch. That says something. Take him up on it. It's time. You can't achieve what these people achieved together and have spent that much time in such close quarters without some seed of that still being there. Because sometimes the most bitter hatred comes from where there was once love. So to the Cavaleras, I say, take Andreas up on the offer, be gracious, go to that last show, do it for yourselves, not for the fans who are like, we want a reunion. Do it for yourselves. Put this to rest and don't wait until someone dies for them to have all these conflicted feelings that you weren't able to express to that person when they were alive. Don't let this go further than that. Do this for your own sakes. And for the fans too, have a release. End this on a bright, uplifting note. Have a hug. Remember all those things that you once felt for each other. You don't have to be the best of friends after this. Wash aside all of the faults and all of the grievances and the grudges and the you did this and the you did that. Set it aside. You guys are getting on there in age. Life is too short to hang on to this stuff. I hope by 2026, these guys can at least get there to all play this final show, to do this right, put this to rest in the right, most bright, most positive way.
Be really curious to know what you think. For Feedback Def, I'm Saby Reyes-Kulkarni, the Apostate Music Journalist. Over and out.